The world before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This video is part 1 of the world before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we will not cover the Arabian tribes or kingdoms in this episode. This episode is strictly going to be about the importance of the Arabian Peninsula and the empires around it. Many people talk about the rise of Islam and its early impressive conquests of the Roman and Persian empires. However, many also overlook or outright ignore the struggles of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions. The world before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before we delve into the early life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to understand the political order of the world around the Arabian Peninsula. This will not only allow a more in-depth look at the rise of Islam, but also to appreciate the struggles of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Arabian Peninsula was never unified before the rise of Islam, with its harsh terrain and deserts virtually separating the peninsula in the north into two parts, that being the western coasts, or the area known as the Hijaz, and the eastern on the Persian Gulf. In the coastal areas, for example the Hijaz, many city-states rose up. Another benefit of the position of these states was the location, being a straight path for traders from Yemen to the Roman Levant, and through trade caravans to the eastern Sassanid Empire. This allowed the city-states on the Hijaz to grow wealthy through trade between Yemen and the Roman Empire, and even farther, that being India. To the north of the Arabian Peninsula, two superpowers of that time existed, the Roman and Persian empires. Now the relationship between these empires affected the Arabian Peninsula greatly. For example, on the frontiers of the Arabian Peninsula, the Romans had their vassals, the Ghassanids, while the Persians also had Arabian vassals in the form of the Lakhmids. The reason for having these vassals was simple: to act as a buffer against raids from the Arabian Peninsula, and also to protect the trade. The Ghassanids and the Lakhmids would come to blows when their overlords would clash in their many conflicts. Another empire that affected the Arabian Peninsula was the Aksumite Empire of Ethiopia, and they were a major player in the region. For example, around the year of 525, an Aksumite Roman invasion was launched on the Yemenite kingdom of Himyar. One of the main reasons for this invasion was the persecution of the Christians by Dhu Nuwas, the Jewish king of Himyar. But we will cover the invasion in another video, inshallah. We also have to understand the strategic importance of the Arabian Peninsula for the three great empires surrounding Arabia. Arabia was on the crossroads of trade, coming in from China and India. Not only that, but the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf were major trading hub and a great source of revenue, meaning money, to the Roman, Persian, and Ethiopian empires. Also, we have to understand the security risks that existed for the Romans and the Persians and the Ethiopian. Whoever controlled the southern Arabian Peninsula would not only be able to attack and raid the heartland of the other's empire, but also could launch invasions from multiple directions. Also, we have to understand that trade was also vital for the economies of the empires surrounding the peninsula. To understand why it was vital, I will try to explain it in a very simple way. Trade means taxes. Taxes means money. Money means you can pay for a larger and more professional army. A larger and more professional army means you can expand your borders. And thus, rinse and repeat. A pretty simple concept. 70 years before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Roman Empire was facing a calamity. The Western Roman Empire had fallen, and in its place, the Germanic tribes of the Franks, Visigoths, the Suebi, and the Ostrogoths, and many more, have taken control of the western lands of the empire. This was a catastrophe for the Roman Empire. But because the Roman Empire was split into two parts, that being the Eastern and Western empires, the Eastern Roman Empire was largely unscathed by their Germanic conquest of the Western Roman Empire. We will cover the Roman response to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in another video, inshallah. Looking towards the east, towards Persia, the Persian Empire also faced many of its own troubles. While they occasionally would go to war against their greater rival, the Romans, we also have to understand that Persia bordered the Central Asian steppe. From Central Asia, raiders would come, nomads with great skill on horseback. And from these nomads, great empires would form. One of these empires would be the Hephthalites, also known as the White Huns. Now, the White Huns, being a confederation of many tribes, would pose a great threat to the Sassanid Persian Empire. The Hephthalites launched devastating raids into the Sassanid Empire, and even forced many of the emperors of the mighty Persian Sassanid Empire to pay huge amounts of tribute. Not only that, but when the Sassanids would try to respond in force, the Hephthalites would crush and humiliate them in battle. But not only did the Hephthalite armies bring low and humiliate the Sassanid Empire, but the Hephthalites launched devastating invasions into India, conquering a large part of the north. Not only that, but the Hephthalites pushed even deeper, but now in the direction of the east, towards East Turkestan. The Hephthalites were a mighty foe. We will talk about the Hephthalite invasions on the Sassanid Empire in another video, inshallah. Coming back to the Arabian Peninsula, another reason why the Sassanid Persian Empire was interested in the Arabian Peninsula was actually pretty simple. The Arabian Peninsula, especially in the south, being the modern day countries of Oman and Yemen, had rich soil, meaning that if it were to be captured, then the Sassanids would be able to generate large amounts of revenue, and not only that, but they would be able to supply their armies and possibly conduct invasions into the Aksumite Ethiopian Empire and coordinate a pincer maneuver, taking Egypt through the Red Sea and Syria through the land route of Iraq. The same thing could be said for the Roman Empire. For years, ever since the time of Julius Caesar's nephew, Augustus, Roman armies have been sent to Yemen to take control of this valuable land. However, the Roman Empire, being more occupied with other things, couldn't completely put its mind to the conquest of Yemen. However, should the Romans conquer Yemen and then subsequently Oman, or what is modern day Oman, then they too would be able to perform a pincer maneuver. Not only that, but they could divert the trade coming into the Persian Gulf and divert it all the way to the Red Sea, thus strangling their opponents without even sending an army into their opponent's land. The Arabian Peninsula, far from being an unimportant landmass, was strategically important, and many empires and emperors always wanted it. This is part 1 of the Rise of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ series, and if you want to see more, please subscribe and click the bell button. Thank you for watching, Jazakallah khair, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.